On the night of June 7, 2021, police arrived at a sprawling rural property in Colleton County, South Carolina, known as Moselle. Near the dog kennels, they found the bodies of 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh and her 22-year-old son, Paul. Both had been shot multiple times at close range. The victims were the wife and son of Alex Murdaugh, the patriarch of a local legal dynasty. For 3 generations, spanning from 1920 to 2006, Alex's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather served as the elected prosecutor for the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office. Alex himself maintained a position as a badge-carrying assistant solicitor, volunteering part-time while pulling in over $1 million a year at his family's powerful personal injury firm. He carried the weight of a century-old legacy, using that inherited authority to navigate and influence the legal and social circles of the Lowcountry. Violent, close-range murders are rare in these upper echelons of power. White-collar criminals typically use paper and systemic influence to solve their problems, not firearms. A double homicide like this directly contradicts the profile of a wealthy, connected attorney, leaving investigators with a deep psychological contradiction to unravel. To reconstruct the night of the murders, we have to look at the digital footprint. This map, compiled by the FBI, shows the exact cell phone and vehicle data from that evening. By extracting data from phones and the telematics system inside Alex's SUV, investigators built an exact timeline of his movements across Colleton County. The vehicle data reveals that Alex's SUV arrives at the Moselle property at exactly 6:42 p.m. Just over an hour and a half later, at 8:17 p.m., Paul Murdaugh's iPhone records a 4% battery life and is eventually unplugged, effectively ending its digital activity. Look at the timestamp block on the right. Between 8:05 and 8:09 p.m., Alex's iPhone extraction data registers 54 rapid steps. Immediately following this burst of physical movement, his phone log shows a sudden string of outbound calls. He starts calling family and friends in quick succession, laying down the digital tracks to show he was simply driving around and making normal calls. Devices don't have emotions, and they don't lie. When you strip away the frantic 911 calls and the outward displays of a grieving father, you are left with the telematics. The raw coordinates and timestamps expose a highly specific pattern of movement and communication, isolating the cold, calculated actions of the offender. At the kennels, the physical evidence was horrifying. Paul was shot twice with a shotgun, while Maggie was shot 4 or 5 times with a rifle. The proximity and angles of the weapons indicated vicious, close-range attacks that left blood and biological matter strewn across the ground and walls. Yet, when police encountered Alex that night, his appearance did not match the grisly environment. Forensic teams found only a few microscopic particles of gunshot residue on his hands, on his shirt and shorts, and on his vehicle seatbelt. For a crime scene that caused that much physical destruction, the suspect was remarkably sanitized, pointing towards a careful and deliberate cleanup before police arrived. This physical evidence, however, became one of the most hotly contested parts of the trial. Investigators used subjective pattern matching to link extraction marks on .300 blackout casings found at the crime scene to other casings around the Moselle property. The defense argued this method was scientifically invalid, noting the state didn't even have the actual murder weapon to test fire and compare. Despite the debates over casing marks, the broad strokes of the scene remained clear. The massive physical trauma inflicted at the kennels stands in stark contrast to a suspect with almost no biological material or residue on him. This gap requires a perpetrator with high emotional control, someone capable of executing extreme violence and immediately pivoting to a tactical, methodical cover-up. For years, Alex maintained the lifestyle of a legal scion while secretly siphoning millions from the clients who trusted him most. He stole from his own partners and embezzled from vulnerable victims, including a deaf quadriplegic man and the estate of his own housekeeper. This required him to maintain a facade of compassion and professional integrity while systematically draining the accounts of people in crisis. By June 2021, the facade was crumbling. A fatal boat crash involving his son Paul had triggered a lawsuit that threatened to expose his financial records, while his law firm had finally discovered the missing funds. Alex was facing a total collapse of his social and professional standing, a reality he attempted to manage through a series of increasingly desperate manipulations. This combination of traits mirrors the dark triad, a predator who views people solely as tools. Within this framework, the murders are instrumental violence. By transforming into a victim, Alex could stall theft investigations and leverage sympathy to shield himself. The killings were a final, narcissistic bid to regain control over his environment. Alex sought to bury his financial crimes under the weight of a horrific family tragedy, gambling that the public's grief for his loss would override their suspicion of his corruption. Alex claimed he visited his mother, who suffers from dementia, at the time of the killings, but his alibi was shattered by a single piece of digital evidence. This iPhone location data shows a red line tracking Paul's movements toward the kennels. At 7:39 p.m., a Snapchat video on Paul's phone clearly recorded Alex's voice in the background, placing him squarely at the murder scene minutes before the shooting began. As the chaotic data points track the final minutes of Paul's phone, they foreshadow the erratic behavior Alex displayed after the murders. 3 months later, he was shot on a rural road while changing a tire. Investigators quickly realized this was a staged murder-for-hire plot. Alex had hired his own drug dealer to kill him, hoping his surviving son, Buster, would collect a $10 million life insurance payout. This botched hitman plot perfectly confirms the pathology at play. Faced with mounting scrutiny, his instinct was to manufacture another crisis. He operates as an offender who views human life as a bargaining chip, attempting to turn violence, trauma, and even his own death into a financial transaction. Alex Murdaugh is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, but the legal battle has now shifted to the South Carolina Supreme Court, where his defense team is actively fighting for a new trial. His attorneys argue his conviction resulted from a tainted trial. They allege that Colleton County's then clerk of court explicitly instructed jurors to watch his demeanor, pushing them toward a quick guilty verdict. Furthermore, the appeal questions whether the extensive financial evidence presented by the prosecution was fair game, or just gratuitous mudslinging designed to prejudice the jury. The Murdaugh case exposes the results of power left unchecked for a century. The murders were the ultimate expression of a lifelong inherited belief that justice was something Alex Murdaugh administered to others, but was never intended to apply to himself.